Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be covering a recent interview with Naoki Yoshida provided by GamingUnion.net. Now before we get started, as is customary, the source of this content is GamingUnion.net. They even have their own video on the content on Final Fantasy Union's YouTube channel. So go to the link, go to the description of the video, find the links there, give them follows, give them likes, whatever it is you got to do to show them their support. They also provide Final Fantasy content on a very regular basis, so may just be adding that to the subscribe list for you. Now this interview is interesting for oddly not much about Final Fantasy XIV. There's one comment in here that I felt stood above the rest, and it's not even about Final Fantasy XIV. That being said, most of it is more about the development process of Final Fantasy XIV and things and troubles and challenges they've had to go through, more so than than what's coming next. You know what I mean? The first question is about the success of Stormblood, and Naoki Yoshida is really happy. They have the most subscribers they've ever had. He said that the marketing and PR team and operations have all done a fantastic job as well, and that everybody should be given credit for what Stormblood's current success level is. He didn't expect it, and he's really happy with the result as much as it was a big surprise. He's also surprised to see it get such high scores on rating websites, because that's just not very usual for an MMO, especially with new MMOs that have come out after the World of Warcraft era. So they're getting ready for all the next stuff, and they're busy trying to plan out new and exciting content that's not just the stuff that we're used to every patch. So they want to make sure they have the next big thing to offer. They're also already working on the next expansion pack, which is normal. We know that they keep years ahead of their schedule, so that way they have some idea of the direction they want to move. Moving on to the next question, it's about whether or not things have gotten easier with developing, whether about the challenges that they encountered. And he says that development technically has picked up the pace and they do things more efficiently now, but they're always, having to deal with new challenges. They're talking about how if you create the same thing over and over again, people are going to get bored. So he likes to give his development team new challenges and new stuff to work on. Sometimes, scheduling-wise, maybe their ideas or maybe the ideas of the entire team don't always work out, so he has to tell them to calm things down a little bit to make sure that they can stay on schedule. But with the team so passionate about making all these new things, it sucks that they have all this limited time frame, but at least they're excited about developing stuff, and as long as they're passionate and they're willing to challenge themselves, they're going to continue doing it, of course. Please look forward to it. So the next thing that we're going to talk about here is jobs with Gaming Union. So obviously there's a bunch of jobs in Final Fantasy, but he's asking a question that was, I should say Gaming Union, they are asking a question that was sort of asked in a few other recent interviews about Final Fantasy XIV. Would they ever introduce a unique job that is not just something you are pulling from a previous Final Fantasy game? So they said that rather than make a new and original job, they wanted to take a look at the archived ones first. But when they're working on designing jobs, they come up with an idea of what job they want to develop. And then if they come up with a new idea that doesn't really match any of the existing jobs in the Final Fantasy franchise, maybe they have to implement an original job at that time. But if it has any sort of semblance to a pre-existing job, they'd probably rather just use that, because they want people to have a familiarity with it, which is something that Final Fantasy does as a whole. It's beneficial to Final Fantasy as a whole when you call back to the old games. It's just something the franchise has kind of always done. Moving on to Gaming Union's next question. They're talking about the unending coil of Bahamut. At this point, I do not know if there were any clears. I'm looking through the answer real quick. It doesn't actually ask how many clears there are, but it's how many people actually get involved in making sure encounters they add are challenging, but not too punishing. And basically, how do you work on the balance of that? And so he says it's mostly balanced mathematically. Now, thinking back to this statement, that reminds me of when Gordius came out. And they said that was mostly tested via mathematics. Mathematically, it was supposed to be possible at a certain point. And that led to a lot of issues. So when I first see that, I get a little concerned that that's still how they're doing things. They just math things out and hope that it pans out when the player base is actually going through it. But that being said, they said it's quite simple in terms of DPS. They set a maximum DPS and they can add a percentage of leeway. I gotta imagine it's more complicated than he's making it out to be. It's not just like, okay, boss. Actually, it might be the case. They put in the number of DPS they want to be required based on what is like the average expected of the gear, and then they tune it to, they just add percentage differences for leeway of like where mistakes can be made and stuff like that. That would actually, yeah, I guess it might actually be as simple as he's making it out to say. It's a very simple formula. It's easy for them to make content that way. In terms of balancing, the battle and planning team, their skill is really high. Debug is done by one team, design is done by one team, and then of course they have their balancing and adjusting done by both the battle and the planning teams. They play the content phase by phase, test it to make sure it's physically possible to clear it, which is important because a lot of people were questioning if Ultimate was physically possible to clear prior to the bunch of clears that we've seen at this point. Naoki Yoshida didn't even want to say for certain if he knew people could beat it, but we all know that he always likes to joke around with stuff like that. So he says only players with a high player skill can be part of the development team when it comes to monsters and battle. They also said that they are indeed working on the next Ultimate battle for patch 4.3. This is something we already knew, but it's just another hard confirmation that they're not abandoning the idea, and they've already begun development on the next Ultimate encounter. Now this is interesting. I didn't expect Final Fantasy XI to come up in a Yoshida interview, outside of like the occasional comparison that they make. But more specifically, question about the mobile version. They talked about how Final Fantasy XI is within the business division, Grandmaster is released on mobile, there's a mobile version being developed with Nexon. These are all things that if you didn't know, yes, Final Fantasy XI is getting a fully functional mobile version that is being co-developed with Nexon. And that is not going to be tied to the PC version of the game, it's going to be something entirely separate, and so we don't really know what to expect from it yet. He then actually just asks, hey, are there plans to expand Vana'diel further? And can you give us an update on that mobile version? Because we've literally heard nothing like in the past 2 years. We've seen like 2 screenshots. Also, are there any plans to expand 14 similar to Final Fantasy XI Mobile, Grandmasters, and mobile games like that? Outside of the companion app, of course. So he straight up gave us the only update we've had on Final Fantasy XI Mobile in like 2 years. I did not expect Yoshida to be the one to drop this on us. To update you on Final Fantasy XI Mobile, because we're in the same business division, I know exactly where we are. At the moment, we're fine-tuning the battle system, and when the time is right, we will be able to make another big announcement, an official one. That's it. In 2 years, that's the most I've heard about Final Fantasy XI Mobile in a single sentence. Nexon has some sort of, I guess, convention or conference coming up next week, or later this week, and we may hear more about it there, but that's the most I've heard about it in the longest time imaginable. As for 14, they'd rather just develop content for the game itself, or focus on the main application. We don't really have that type of content available on mobile, because they'd like to focus on the main application. When he says main application, I'm assuming he means the main game. He could also be talking about the companion app, but either way, we know we have that companion app coming. Do you see a time where Final Fantasy XI will stop and there would be room for another Final Fantasy MMO? This has been a regular topic because everyone makes a joke that Final Fantasy 17 will be the next MMO because we had 11 and then 14, so everyone thinks it'll be 17. He says that it's kind of weird having multiple MMOs within one company. Basically, like, for example, even if they were to do one, if people are still playing 11, there's no reason to stop 11 because Final Fantasy 20 would not be Final Fantasy 11 and would not be like Final Fantasy 11. So he says Final Fantasy 20 is an MMO, wouldn't really influence any decisions around 11. He said it would probably be more influenced by Final Fantasy 14 as it's more modern and up to date, but that for the most part it would stand on its own and it wouldn't really mean anything for Final Fantasy 11. Like if they did do one, then all 3 MMOs would exist and they wouldn't just get rid of one. Going on to the next one, he mentions that, like how Final Fantasy XIV, the races are similar, and there's tons of enemy models that are borrowed. It helped players with the transition, and of course, with A Realm Reborn in particular, helped with the rapid schedule of development time. It's also to trigger our nostalgia. We all know that's a big reason why they reuse models from the other Final Fantasy games, especially the recent HD remasters, or just Final Fantasy XI. As for what it is, as long as 14 can keep expanding, no reason to make another MMO. More beneficial to keep working on 14. And then he even references World of Warcraft. Like, this is how unusual it is for a company to have more than one MMO. They started a second MMO with Project Titan, and then they canceled it because it didn't make sense to have more than one MMO. So he's already kind of weirded out that they service 3 MMOs with Final Fantasy XI, Final Fantasy XIV, and Dragon Quest X. And then on top of that, people are asking if there will be another one. It's like, what's going on? I don't understand what this fascination is. Then they ask him how he would feel about being a producer or a director on his own Final Fantasy offline numbered title. And he kind of he was super humble about it and super honest. He was just like, I don't really have that kind of vision for a game or for another game. He has ideas right now that if he moves to another project, he'd love to implement. But it's not like he feels this intense urge to chase that. And it's not in a situation where the company would exactly let him either. And it's not like he would leave the company if he asked and they said no. He says his appetite isn't that big. He doesn't want to be responsible for the next offline numbered series, you know? And I guess I don't really blame him with the amount of time and effort he puts forward to 14. I mean, I have to imagine he considers it his baby. If his vision's anywhere, it's probably in the game we're in currently. So it's still, I'm personally someone who would love to see what his vision could be for a single player game. But if he's saying he doesn't have that vision, he doesn't have that appetite, I think it's better that he sticks to the thing that he's working on now. And I think it's good that he's honest about that, you know, that's just not for him. He says that if people ask him to, if like every fan was like, yeah, we want you to do it, and he loves that people are, you know, suggesting that he could potentially be the next person to direct it. And he says not only would he do it, he'd put 100%. He'd make sure that it's a title that made them all happy that they wanted him to do it. So as much as he's happy for that, or if the company asks him to do something like that, he says that if he were to do another Final Fantasy game, he's a fan personally of high fantasy. So the concept for another Final Fantasy game from him would be a high fantasy style fantasy game. As for the next question from Gaming Union, it's about Dissidia. For those who don't know, Dissidia is rapidly increasing its roster. It just caught up with the villains other than Gabranth for the arcade version. On top of that, they have Ramza. Don't forget, Y'shtola was added in that one. Noctis is going to be added in January. You also have Ace from Type 0. Kane was added from one of the previous games as well. So the question is, will 14 get a villain? And if they do get a villain, what would he want? So he says that if he had to pick a villain from 14 to represent the chaos side of Final Fantasy 14 in Dissidia, he would personally go with Xenos Ye Galvis and or Nail Van Darnus. He feels that they don't overlap concept-wise with any of the existing characters that are already in Dissidia, so they would be really cool choices, personality-wise and concept-wise, to add to Dissidia. As for another character on the Cosmos side, if he had the choice, he would pick Alphino. He says Alphino is like his brother. You know, I guess that's not a bad choice. There's a lot of overlap in the way that Final Fantasy 14 characters operate similar to other characters. So, yeah, I feel like that could be a pretty decent choice. But that is the interview from Gaming Union. The Final Fantasy 11 mobile thing was definitely the most interesting aspect to me, mostly because the lack of information for that title has just been insane. So hopefully we'll be finding out more about that soon. I'll be sure to keep you up to date if we find anything else. Again, be sure to go give all your love to Gaming Union and Final Fantasy Union, both their YouTube channel and their website, because, well, they did a good job with this one. So thank you for watching. I will see all of you I'll see all you fine ladies and gentlemen in the next video. I'm going to go take a break because clearly my brain's fried. I will see you next time, and until then, take care.